funds to that. And so what the problem is going to be is going back to the community that was just very generous to us and say, no, we're going to need a little more money here and there.
I'm Bill Kelso with the Good Heart Artist Residency, and I'd say our challenge is we're very small. It was something my wife and I started, and we're kind of at that awkward stage of where we've raised money for operational funds and all that, but we've also done all the work unpaid, and so we're at that point where we've got to make a decision as to how do you jump to the next level and actually pay. We have one part-time paid staff now, but how do you actually go to the point where to be sustained, we eventually have to have paid staff. And so it's really to make that next leap. That's kind of our challenge right now.
My name is Bill Kelso. I'm the Executive Director of the Sheboygan Area Arts Council, which manages the Historic Opera House in Sheboygan. And my challenge is that I took this role in October. So I joke that I always wanted to be the manager of a theater during the middle of a pandemic, and I got my wish. So everything is a challenge for me. This is a second career, and I'm not coming from an arts background per se, though I did study violin here. I guess one particular challenge or question I have is prior to my joining the organization, we had a rather large gift, which is a good thing. So we've started an endowment. And so my questions are like how to capitalize on that, how to grow the endowment, how to reach people who maybe have not given to us in the past, who are like on inland lakes, who have resources that maybe our traditional donor base in Sheboygan does not have, and how to let them know that we exist and we have them now and how to go about growing it.
I'm Cindy Shirley, Blissfest Music Organization. I'm the second director in a 40-year history. I started during the pandemic. Previously, I was development director for 15 years for Cookie Tree Art Center. And Blissfest, the challenge is Blissfest did not do any fundraising at all. They did a festival and then lived off that money all year long. I was fortunate enough spending these first 2 years just COVID relief funding, so we've been really helpful that way. But now the challenge is 40-year organization, beloved event. There's people for Thanksgiving. I have to start a fundraising program from the beginning, so it's just priorities, balance, small staff. How do I get it all done? We did buy donor software though.
Thanks, Donna. What did you buy? Boomerang. Sarah Maddie, I'm the executive director for the Charlevoix Circle of Arts. Prior to being in the art sector, I was in fundraising for human service agencies for many years. I guess always fundraising challenges in any organization, but I guess advice I'd be looking for today is communicating the value of the arts and the need for the arts, which is much more difficult to articulate than in the human services sector, and especially related to fundraising for funders. Thank you. Okay, so we got everyone in shorts.
Emily, we have a couple of people online.
For sharing, and we are all learning from each other all the time, so I think I can speak for Tamara when I say that we're not gonna now do our little mini presentation and give you all the answers that you need, but I hope that some of our lived experience can be helpful to you, and we will get through that quickly so that we can all share with each other some ideas about how to help and support each other in our work. So again, thank you so much for sharing your experience, and I'm gonna turn it over to Tamara, who's gonna talk a little bit about mission.
Great, thank you, Emily. Before I get started, I see that a couple of people have joined us online. And so Alex, would you like to share anything? I know that you're here representing MACC, or it looks like Judy, you might just be connecting. If you're available, would you like to turn on your camera and microphone and share your information and challenge? Okay, hearing nothing, I will go ahead and move on to what we'll try to make a quite short presentation regarding just a few key topics that we wanted to share with you. We want to leave plenty of time to sort of address your challenges. So I was really happy to hear that so many of you have a really clear sense of mission, and that you're making great strides that are allowing you to create endowments that'll support your programs over time. And so, of course, mission is the starting point for everything that we do, of course. But I think one of you mentioned there can also be some things that seemingly fall under the mission, but are a little bit of a departure from the key mission that you're trying to accomplish. So I think the first step in making sure that you're very mission focused is creating a compelling case for what you want to support. That may be just your operations, like your key mission. We want all gifts to support that through the operating fund, or it may include other expanded projects. But, ask yourself, what is the destination that we're trying to get to? What's the impact that's desired? And what's it going to take to get us there? And why should your supporters join in the effort? If you get them on board with your mission, then there's a little bit less of trying to meet their mission for your organization. And so then after you've decided what that mission is, think about the audience for what your appeal might be. There are specific funding opportunities that might be different than your general support that you are asking for. The opportunities that come up through grants don't always match up with your purpose or timing. So I think you need to think carefully about what you are wanting to ask your supporters for. And every project needs champions that are very close to the mission of that project or purpose, who are out there talking with people. In some cases, that's just you. I know that you don't all have big staffs, but it's always great if there are volunteers and participants who are also with you out there telling your story to the appropriate audiences. I know that funders always like new and innovative projects, and in some cases it's really about building your organization. So think carefully about, when they're asking you to add a new position rather than funding an existing one, and how you articulate to them why it's so important that the foundational pieces are there, and that allows you to do other expanded projects with time. Constantly adding programs when you need support for your core mission is a hard way to get by. Through the pandemic, I have seen that there's been some increased opportunity to focus on what's needed to run your programs fundamentally. So people are a little bit more open to that message, I think, than they maybe have been in the past. So that's an opportunity for all of us to take advantage of. And one way to do that is through including some really authentic voices in the way that you get your message out there. And that is the subject of the next slide, and I will turn it over to Emily.
Thank you so much, and I think Tamara's right, and the creation of things like emergency funds and everything that we faced during the pandemic has perhaps opened funding opportunities up a bit more to operating support versus just straight project support. So I think that's good for us in the industry that those opportunities now exist. But no matter what you're going for, an authentic voice is so important in telling your story. So who can best tell your story and make the ask broadly and individually? Everyone, no matter what industry you're in responds to stories. So they light up our imagination, they connect us to our own lived experience, and your mission statement can be perfect. It can be picture perfect, it can have all the right words, say all the right things, but sharing the stories are half how your work impacts people is what really connects to your donors, whether they be foundations or individuals. And that is not taking the place of being transparent about the impact of your organization's work. That is compelling and it's important, but coupling that data with the story of an individual whose life was impacted by your work, that humanizes it and it makes it real. So you don't have to have a big staff to do that. You don't have to have a big staff to tell your story. You can tell your story probably better than anyone else except for the person who's been impacted by your work. So ways to do that, large and small, continuously seek fresh quotes from constituents who've been impacted by your work, that you can do that, quick and dirty, conduct interviews with your constituents, have coffee with them regularly, invite them, have an open house, whatever means makes sense to you to get those stories. Sources from thank you notes from students if you work with students, personal interviews, however you collect that data, those are treasures. So keep a nice library of all of those quotes and experiences so that you can share those in appeals, on your website, social media. There are a lot of really neat programs. We just started using Thank You at Interlochen, where you can make quick and dirty videos, even using your iPhone with some of those stories and share them with your database. So those are great ways, 60-second videos to get that story out there. And another sort of example that we faced here, to bring it home to things that we went through here at Interlochen, is during the pandemic, we at the start, were in a deep crisis when everything shut down. As our president said, the 3 sectors that were hit hardest and fastest by the pandemic were education, hospitality, and presenting organizations, and we are all those things. So it hit us hard and fast, and we knew that the appeal we did at the end of the year was not going to be the usual business as usual letter. We needed to get out there and say we need help or we are in deep, deep trouble. And we sat down, our team, and said, who can carry this message most authentically? Normally, it's a student or an alum. This time, we decided it had to be Trey, had to be our president, because he could speak deeply to the crisis that we were facing and how much we needed donor support. And as it turns out, people stepped up for us in ways that we weren't even expecting. It's humbling to know how much people step forward and continue to carry us through what is now, hopefully on the backside of this crisis, but he was absolutely the right voice in that moment. And then internalizing the why. You may not be the one who's impacted by your organization's work directly, but you can internalize somebody else's story to make sure that you're an authentic ambassador. So my lived experience of this is when I started at Interlochen, in the annual fund, we had a student in the visual arts department who was homeless, and she had been making art with lipstick in Detroit on the street. And by the grace of donors and supporters, we had a scholarship enough for her to be enrolled here at the academy. She had her first real home at the academy and had experienced tremendous trauma in her life, but she ended up here thanks to the generosity of donors. Now, that's not my story, but I love that story. And so I can tell that story and it can translate to somebody else's lived experience and inspire them. So as you're continually amplifying these authentic voices within your community, you'll start to naturally build a pipeline of supporters and volunteers within your organization. And Tamara's going to talk a little bit more about building that pipeline for your organization.
Great, thanks, Emily. Those authentic voices that she talks about, they draw in partners, they expand your community, and you can then structure your initiatives to help build that pipeline. And I know several of you were naming that as a challenge a little earlier of how you bring donors in. For my first point on concentric circles, that's a little bit of a borrowed concept from the campaign that John Bogley and I worked on at Whitman College. But it really works well to focus on your most loyal donors and their interests, your champions, your board, your biggest donors. Let them help you set the agenda and scope of work. They need to buy in. Make sure that your foundational work is fully funded, that they're excited about any special projects that you have. But, you know, as you go through that process, you don't forget to involve those younger and up and coming supporters. They might not change the bottom line right now, but, you know, their engagement now is really important, and it'll have an impact on your next project. You know, as an example, also from Whitman College, we had a parent couple who gave $5,000 toward a science renovation, and we included them in the process. We celebrated them as donors. We let them know how important it was, what the impact of their gift was, and sort of as a bit of a surprise, they came to us and said, you know, we saw what you did there, and we're really interested in funding something bigger. And they made a $500,000 commitment toward a computational lab, which they saw as an essential part of moving things forward. So you never know. I mean, we had some sense that they had that sort of capacity, but you never know where the inspiration for that interest that gets you to your next gift is. And then, you know, there's always the question of what the mix looks like for your fundraising efforts overall. I mean, you have to balance your annual fund. You have to have those foundational dollars that help you meet your minimum operations goal and have the fundamentals out there. And then there might be major gifts or helping direct special projects. And then there's the mix of grants, which can be a little bit of a challenge, you know, whether those grants actually match up with what you're trying to do. But just be mindful of how far off track those grants might take you and from your priorities, and work on that mix. You know, I mentioned that as one of my top challenges earlier. And I think it's always a good idea to carefully consider the return on investment of directing your efforts towards special fundraising projects that might take you off of mission in a way. The final point is that we're all in this together. You and your supporters are a team, right? We've used sort of the ensemble concept at Interlochen. You know, it takes all players to make an ensemble, to make beautiful music together. And so including everybody in the process, having all voices heard, making the personal connection with each one of those people is important. And Emily has a little bit more to say about that.
Yeah, so this is actually my favorite part of philanthropy. And I've got a few quotes here. One of the people I'm quoting is actually sitting right in front of me. But so just I'll read them out because I think they're important. They're important to me anyway. Perfect is the enemy of the good in fundraising. Speak from the heart and you won't go wrong. I don't know who said that, but I love it. Show me that you know me. That's Penelope Burke. If you don't know her work, she's fantastic. But she's a big advocate for big or small, pick up the phone and call your donors every day. If you just call them. And then finally, each one reach one. That is John Mobley. It's so important. These are one at a time. Relationships are built one at a time. So every day having some effort towards making connections with your supporters is critical. And philanthropy at all levels, every single level, foundation support, major gifts, individual giving, it is all deeply personal. So connecting directly with donors individually and broadly is critical to inspiring them to give and to keep them giving and to have them give loyally. So step one, this is very brass tacks, but fix your database. I mean, and then you can't connect with anybody if your database is broken. So yeah, if you're not starting with the data, you're hosed. So invest in the time to clean up your database and do it yourself if you have to, or have an outside vendor do it for you. If you've got an unexpected gift, that might be a great way to spend your money. If you need help with your database, get it fixed up, because you know that's the wheels on the vehicle that drives your entire organization. Make sure you can reach your goals. My personal experience with that is I worked at Boston University Table Institute earlier in my career, and part of a big university, but we had our own database with about 5,000 names in it, and we sent somebody sends in a gifts? Well, it's because the database wasn't what it was all broken, things were in the wrong field, addresses were wrong, I hadn't done HOA cleanup in years. So I spent probably 3 months fixing that database by hand, but then all of a sudden people started because they were giving letters. So it is a very, very brass tacks thing, but it's so important. Next, individual outreach. I alluded to this earlier, but when in doubt, reach out. Don't worry about having all the information about someone or knowing their life story before you pick up the phone. Get the basics, how they like to be referred to, their history with your organization if you have it, their lifetime giving if you have it. Just give yourselves 3 or 4 bullets about them and then just call. Because if you spend a lot of time trying to know everything about them before you call, first of all, it's creepy. But also it doesn't really serve you because 9 times out of 10 you pick up, you call, and it goes straight to voicemail anyway, right? So just send the email, call. You'll be so amazed by what happens when you take the leap. And my story of that here at Interlochen is we have 2 wonderful volunteers who are leadership donors and volunteer for everything and support us through the campaign at the radio station. And that was a cold call that I made the first week I was on the job. So I thought, that's interesting, they're leadership donors, first time they lived in Indiana. What's the story? And the story was they just moved here and retired and they were looking for a place to volunteer. Would I like to go have a beer? Yes, I would. Yes, I would like to do that. So it's those magic moments that happen, and your donors love you. You're their friends. So just call them. They'll love to hear from you. And then for broad-based outreach, find regular opportunities. This gets back to your library of quotes and everything, right? To connect your donors with the heart of your work. And it's not fasting. You know about fasting? I'm going to send you a thank you note, and there's an appeal at the bottom. So no fasting. Just send them a note that shows what's going on. Here's a clip from our recent show. Here's a kid talking about their experience. Here's a picture of our new lobby table. Whatever. It just find regular opportunities to share those moments with your donors. And here at Interlochen, we do a series called Art in Your Inbox, which I love, that has student performances or poems. Whatever we find that we think is cool, we just love to share it with our donors, and they love to see it because many of them graduate and move away from here and don't have a chance to come back, but that brings them back. So look for those moments. And that is a transition into our last slide, which is about stewardship and cultivation. And this is kind of a co-pro for Tamara and me, but we felt like this is something that we both do every day in our work. John too, I think John's nodding, I can't see his head behind you. Yeah, very well, yeah. So good stewardship is cultivation. If you're stewarding your donors well, you are helping them get closer to you, which is increasing the likelihood that they are going to continue and increase their support. And I also have a note here, which I love to talk about surprise roses. And this is something I stole from a consultant that we worked with here at Interlochen, who said that if you surprise someone with roses, they'll love you forever. If you promise them roses and then don't deliver, they'll be mad at you. But I love that example because I think it's true. Those surprise emails, those mission moments, those generate so much goodwill and build so much relationship between you and your constituents. And let's see, that's talking about FIO. We already talked about fix your database. So Tamara, can I turn it over to you to talk a little bit
absolutely. And I'm gonna go quickly because and not talk about this too much, but you all know, you all have experienced a mission moment, right? Like it's that dynamic performance or an exhibition or an event, the moment where you can see, dreams being realized and soaring change happening. Our final bit of advice is to share those. Share them with your donors, share them with your attendees, and help them become donors. Think about what inspires you, and then have those moments happen in front of your donors in some way. Share them, tell them about them. I want to leave a little bit of time for discussion. We got started late, and so I will start that by turning it over to John Bogley, who has a great story about his mission moment when he first came to Interlochen.
Oh boy, I forgot we were going to do this. Okay, so yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So I arrived at Interlochen in the summer of 2019. I was a musician in college, married an actress, and everybody in my family was an artist but me. I was interested but not very talented. But I knew I was at a fantastic place when, I'm gonna move away from that mic. Walking down the sidewalk to Corson Auditorium, which is just next door here, and following 5 students up the path, and they break out into show tunes. These are our theater kids, you know, they could have been on their way to the Rouse, they could have been on the way to the, any one of your stages. I mean, we've got a number of different performing arts organizations, but only in Interlochen, the kids break out unabashedly into a musical. And I knew that students who are in the arts in high schools oftentimes find themselves ostracized. Either they're not academic enough or they're not jockey enough to fit in. And the thing that I heard that then resonated for me from that point on about it from Interlochen alums was, I found my people. And I knew that those kids had found their people because they'd known each other for 3 days. I mean, camp had just started and they broke out into song together. There is a great book that I'm gonna take a minute to promote that I encourage you to read. It will take you no more than 40 minutes. It's Susan Howlett's Boards on Fire. A lot of the concepts that have been explained here today are in Susan's book. Susan's become a friend of mine because I must have bought 40 copies of it for people who I know and people in professions like this. Boards on Fire. Each of you said I can never find time to fundraise. Each of you has a board or people who volunteer for your organization. Say we're gonna have a book group. I want you to read 10 pages of this 60-page book. We're gonna talk about it and then you're gonna come in with our story and then you're gonna arm or equip them with your story that they can tell to get one other donor to join your group. Boards on Fire by Susan Howlett is perfect. You need nothing more than that in so many ways. Howlett.
Thank you, John. So that was the end of the sort of formal part of our presentation. I've been sitting here sort of reflecting on everybody's challenges, and there's a lot of commonality, I think, and there's also some, I think, unique things that we can help each other. So one that's stuck in my mind, and I hope you'll forgive me for picking on you, but I'm looking at you. So Sarah, right, from Charlotte Boys Circle of the Arts. So you talked about being from a human services background in fundraising, right? And how do you deliver the message of the arts? And that resonated with me because I think one of the best pieces of advice I got early in my career was from somebody who said, go read Harvard Business Review when you're looking for ideas. When you're stuck and you can't figure out how to, go read something from some other industry that has nothing to do with what you're doing and see what comes up. And there's some intersectionality, I think, between the work that you did in your previous life and the work that you're doing now that could be really, really interesting. So that, is there something sort of particular about that struggle that has been rearing its head at you?
Well, I think during the pandemic, a lot of times the arts took a backseat to health and emergency needs and people don't have food to eat. Sorry.
Okay, we can carry something.
I think especially during the pandemic, the arts took a backseat to other emergency needs, healthcare, food insecurity, some of those things. So how do we articulate to our donors and supporters and even the community and new donors why the arts are important and why they should be supported?
So I can share an Interlochen story about that, and then I think Tamara will have some great insights from all the grant work that she does, in partnerships and finding those places of intersection are so important in that work. But the appeal letter that I talked about that Trey signed, the letter that we bumped out of the way that we had gotten all teed up to go was from an alumnus who was a percussionist here at Camp and Academy. And he became an emergency physician, moved to California, that's where he's based now. And he had written a beautiful letter about how much, he still loved to play the drums, and even though he was a busy doctor, it was his, release for him. That letter, we sent it out a year later, because we were a year into the pandemic, everybody was tired, everybody was, isolated, lonely, and missing the power of the arts and understanding deeply, but maybe not knowing how to say how much the arts transcended all the pain and suffering that was happening in people's lives. And that I felt like was, even though we delayed, that letter initially, and it would have been a powerful letter if we'd sent it in the spring of 2020, I think in the spring of 2021, it resonated even more. So how does your work affect, or uplift people in any situation, be that, a crisis situation like a pandemic or just in the day-to-day? How does your work uplift people's lives? And so and Tamara, sorry, I can't see you. But what advice would you give in this area?
Well, I would say that for a lot of grant-making institutions, you can't move what they want to support very much, although you can make connections within sort of uplifting communities to the benefits of things like scholarships, and access to your programs sometimes resonates with them. I think with individual donors, the easier case to make is to ask them why the arts are important to them, and try and pull out, all of those skills through making art, collaboration, education, that turns people into, we say at Interlochen, change makers that the world needs, right? Like the arts are essential, and getting them to reflect back to you how they have found the arts essential in their life has been helpful in meeting some of those grant requirements, or getting people to understand why what we do is important.
The ability to be creative, the ability to be resilient. Arts are hard. You're not always accepted, or you wind up getting turned down for a grant request. So skill of creativity, resilience, and then building community. Old Town Playhouse. People gather at the Old Town Playhouse since I was a kid and beyond. People gather there, and it's a way to build community. And I think you make the case for the value of community in a time of great isolation. You say, isn't it great we can get back together? It would be terrible if the Old Town Playhouse, or forgive me, I forgot the organization.
Circle of Arts.
Circle of Arts. So Circle of Arts weren't there. Imagine sort of the quiet that would come from the spaces that you've inhabited, and then just paint the picture with that.
Thank you. Anybody want to volunteer? You want to pick another victim out of my pizza notebook here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just some general ideas. I talked about our successful campaign to buy the old art building. And it was really my first experience major fundraising. And some things that I learned was we would invite ourselves to our executive director would invite ourselves to people's houses that we thought had some big money to give. And someone said, Dan, you're not asking for yourself, you're asking for your organization, number one. Number two, these people have money and are looking for places to give. And so you're giving them an opportunity to give. And when we went to talk with them, the first thing we would do is ask them about their connection to the old art building. What does it mean to you? What concerts have you gone to? What plays have you seen? And it gets them working in their mind. They're defending your organization. And so that leads into some really good conversations about asking for money. And then ask them for a specific number. Ask them for a specific number. hard to do, but get an idea of what they might be able to give you and say, would you feel comfortable giving us $200,000? Now, all they have to do is say no, but they might say sure, and they will occasionally and feel very good about it. If you don't ask them for a number and they can give $200,000, they might give $2,000 and feel good about it, you know, in a way you go. Ask specific numbers. And one other thing that we're thinking of, that we're doing in terms of advocacy is if you have memberships in your organization, encourage people who have friends that just moved into the area to give them a membership in your organization as a welcome to the area gift. And we're also encouraging realtors who have just sold someone a house. Often they'll give them a thank you present. We're saying, why don't you give them a membership in the old art building as a thank you gift? Welcome to the community. And that's building our membership, and it's working out really well.
That's a great idea, thank you. Yes.
This is a little bit of a segue, but I wanted to ask it earlier during the fundraising trends. I'm wondering what people think as a trend of listing all your donors. You know, as we start to solicit younger donors, maybe it feels old school to have this list, and do people really want to be on the list? And what is your feeling about listing your donors publicly?
I think that for me, and I can see John, the tip of your tongue, I think it goes back to the Penelope Burke that show me that you know me. You can be explicit in saying, you know, would you prefer to be anonymous, and then honor that? Because people who want to be anonymous tend to really want to be anonymous. So I think attention to that detail is important. How you list it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. We still do traditional program listings here with our summer performances. But you can also, if you have permission, do website listings for your donors. I also work with the radio station, I see Peter back there. One thing we started doing was reading names on the air for our sustaining donors. I think there's more avenues than just your program booklet. But do know that for a great number of your donors, it's still very important for them to see their names, and they're looking. If you don't hear from them, it's because they're happy with how you did. If you did a bad job, they're gonna call you. John, anything to add to that?
I suggest you email Tamara. She and I had this debate every year for 16 years about whether we list everybody who gave $1 or we start at $1,000 and above. And that's really hard because there are environmental issues with printing extra pages of all those wonderful donors who are making lower level gifts. It depends on your organization, but I'm reminded of something my first fundraising president taught me, which he said, conversation with the donor is, fundraiser says, I just can't thank you enough, and the donor says, well, go ahead and try.
And Ian, may I ask, how much more time do we have left?
We're actually, you're done.
We're done,